Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here today on Digitize HQ. All things digital for the C-suites and everybody across the organization. Today we have a special guest with us, Elizabeth Santin, who is the VP of Product Research with Jefo Nutrition. Did I get that right, Elizabeth?
Yes, it is right. Thank you.
And of course, we've got the wonderful Brandon Lee, the CEO and founder of Funnel Amplified, with us here as well. And so today we're going to be talking about all things data and why data is so important, especially going into 2022 for all organizations. And of course, we all know what data is, but do we really? And that's where we want to start today. And we kind of want to break it out throughout the organization and talk about what each area of an organization has already in terms of great data, but how they may or may not be using that. Does that make sense?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, Brandon, did you want to start off with the kind of data? Because this is an area that you are so strong in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, the challenge with saying we're talking about data. Sorry, I can't say data. The American of me doesn't let me say it. The challenge with data is, I think, is that we've been told data, 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 data. And then in our real everyday workings, there's a high need for data. And then the real question is, are we using it? How are we using it? And how are we using it to make decisions? And I think a lot of times there's just a disconnect across that continuum of data. And there's just, it's hard. We gather a lot of data these days.
Yeah. So the question is, are we using it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Elizabeth, what do you think about what are the challenges with using data to grow our digital footprints?
But I think people are not really aware how to use it. They are afraid about to use that. It's very funny because yesterday I just published in my LinkedIn paper that one of my students did using the data in Brazil about salmonella, for example, that comes from the Ministry of Agriculture. So it's a data that is official. It's there. Everyone can take it. It's you don't need even to ask for permissions because it's public. And we learn a lot of things that could help people to reduce the risk of salmonella in poultry, just looking for this data. But people are afraid to look in the data because first they don't know how to do it. And this is official data, but I'm talking about data that people has at the companies, a lot of data, and they are afraid to share it. They think that it's like funny, it's like Facebook. One of my friends, she said, I'm gonna go out of Facebook because otherwise they're gonna go there and take my data and use my data and follow me and blah, blah, blah. And then I say, well, if somebody's doing it with me, I feel very important because there's many people in the world for them to take care just of me. Of course, my data, they come to a platform that is used, but it's not myself. It's just one number that is there. So for me, a big challenge is to explain people that share data is not mean that you're gonna really expose yourself or your company. And I think this is a common fear of many company and many professionals.
Yeah. Thomas, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's as I'm listening to that, and I think fear is a big part of it. And you think of different kinds of data, right? In your case, you were talking about Facebook, and that is one of the biggest fears, not just with digital data, but also with social media, right? People have a fear that whatever they put up there is going to somehow be a a problem or cause other issues, so they're afraid to use it. But when we look at the organization itself as well, I mean, each department within a company has its own data reservoir. Marketing has all its data, whatever that might be. Sales has its own data. Product development and research has its own data, and they don't share, right? And maybe for some of the reasons that you're talking about, Elizabeth, I think that's very true. But the problem is when they don't share, the company is losing out an enormous opportunity to actually do such a better job, both for their customers as well as the industry. And in the end, they're losing the opportunity to grow and make more revenue. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got Susan here. Let me put that up there. Data is essential, but not dirty data, especially data inputted by the persons providing it. Data cleansing is critical. Yeah, thank you for adding that, Susan. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges, and I think speaking to what Susan said about dirty data, is just there's so much data. I think that in a lot of companies, the culture of the data, we need the data, we need the data, we need the data. Does that get the data? Are we getting the data? Has created this culture of getting data, but then either not using it well, or letting, like in Susan's case, it becomes dirty data because we haven't been managing it well. And I think it just gets very overwhelming for a lot of companies.
But how to clean the data? How can we do it in a clear? So this is also something like I sometimes thinking when, as a research, for example, when I receive a data from a research, and then you can sometimes use the outliers and take it as outliers. But in this case, like of big data, how is do we have a right methodology to do a very fair, let's say, fair cleaning of the data?
Yeah, I think that's the question. I don't know how to answer that question, Elizabeth.
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's a tough one, and every organization is different, and it depends upon what you mean by clean the data, right? So if your data is dirty because it's got false information, that's one thing, or it's been put together in a way that doesn't make sense, that's another thing. But the big thing for me with data points, I'm going to change the way I'm saying that, Brian. With data points is to reflect them to the people in a way that makes sense to them. So the way you look at your data and your data points, Elizabeth, is going to be completely different than the way they might look at that in marketing, right? So if you want to share your data with marketing and from a product research and development perspective, you've got to be able to put that together in a way that makes sense to marketing. And it's the same for marketing. So if marketing wants to share data with you so that you can make sense of what you're seeing in the field and the research you're doing and how that overlays with actual customers, they have to do that in a way that's usable for you, right? And I think therein lies the challenge. So you've got these silos in the companies with all this data, right, piling up and growing and growing and growing, and that's great, except that only they can use it. And I think that becomes a communication issue more than maybe it becomes a cleaning the data issue. That's just me talking out loud, but that's kind of my experience. What do you think?
Elizabeth, what do you think on that?
And you can disagree, by the way.
Well, no, I mean, I think for me, I mean, I almost, when we were talking about data being the topic, I almost excused myself from participating today, primarily because data is, I just think it's such an overwhelming topic now. And it's, I don't know if there's really like right systems for data. I think it's all situational. I think it depends on each company. I think it depends on the culture of companies. Like some of the things that you're talking about, Thomas, it's I think it's also indicative of the silos that companies have for everything, and data just becomes another thing that keeps all of these different departments apart and not communicating with each other. So, Elizabeth, how does Jefo Nutrition look at data, and how do you all use data?
Yeah, I think we are just at the beginning of evaluate the data as they should be. We are still learning in a learning process of evaluate that. But I'm gonna agree with Thomas. Maybe we are evaluating the data separately, and I would love to have the opportunity if you can join, put all this together. You merge this data to understand better. Um Even before Jeffo, I have been professor for some many years at university, and I developed a system that we call Ice Inside, where we pick the data from the field and try to analyze it and share it. And when we try to do it in this another company that I have, and in this patent that we developed, we saw many connections that we can do. For example, it's a system for gut health in poultry, so we need to connect it with the feed, the price of the feed, to understand the impact of it in health and performance. And what I feel when I try to use this data is, first, it's not clear for me what is the best system that I can use to evaluate the data. You know, we still have in mind, and not just me, when I discuss with people, to use stats like the regular stats, where you compare, like, or you do like a mode, or the regular stats. And I think there is not a clear answer how we gonna analyze this data, how is the system that we use, the program or anything. So this is one. And the second is still, again, I talk here, I'm having very hard time to take this data from the people, because they don't want to share. They want to share with me, but they don't want to put it in the big system that I can compare it with another data that I have. So this is the two situations that I feel when I manage data from field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that comes back to a couple of things that Brandon said. The first of which is the most important, and that's culture, right? And when you have a culture of people doing this, right, and keeping everything to themselves, then that only makes what you just described, Elizabeth, so much worse. So you have to create a culture where people are working together and aligning with that. And I think that the other thing, and we learned a lot about this in the 90s and in the 2000s. And that is that everybody that we work with in our own company, never mind outside the company, is in fact our customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm working with one of the departments in the company that I need to share data with, or vice versa, they become, or I become, their customer. And I think one of the things that we forget to do, and we do this externally improperly very often as well, is that we don't describe and learn enough about our customer. So we don't relate our data back to what's important to them rather than what's important to us. I mean, we see our data, or our data, whatever word I'm using today, right? We see all that, and we relate it to ourselves, and we get it, and we can make sense of it. And then we give it to one of the other departments, or one of the other teams, or in fact our own customers, in the real sense of the word, and we don't understand why they don't get it. Well, they don't get it because that's not necessarily the same level of importance for them as it is for us, and their perspective is different. And the first thing that we need to do in any case, whether internally or externally as a business, is to create and understand our customer. And we have to know the customer profiles. And it's like anything we do as a company, when we promote a new product or we're doing our research, if we don't do that in accordance with who we're doing it for, in other words, what's important to them, not what's important to us, but what's important to them, then our results are going to be poor no matter how we do it, if that makes sense. And I think that customer experience and customer surveys and customer profiles, internally or externally, are critical to data and research. Because if you don't do that, I don't know why you're doing it for.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Who is the company or who is the brand today that we can say, well, these guys are really using and doing a very good applying of big data evaluation, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of the biggest one that I can think of is that big shipping company, the global shipping company. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Brandon, help me out here. It's not Costco. It's I'm trying to think the name of them, because they went through it'll come to me. They went through a digital process of the kind that we're talking about 4 or 5 years ago. And what they did is they aligned all of their data points within the company, right? And I'll think of the name here in a bit. And they did everything we're talking about, and then they externalized that to their own customers, and they went completely digital. So all of the information they disseminate now to the marketplace is digital. So in other words, they're using social media, they're using digital channels, they're using their website, they're using nothing but digital channels. Evergreen, I'm trying to remember if that's the name of it. That could be it, but I can't. I know it's a global company. I don't think they're out of Germany. I want to say Schenker, but I don't know if that's right. But in any case, it'll come to me. And what happened in that result, and this is a huge company, it's one of the largest shipping companies in the world. And what happened because of that is they totally changed the culture of the company, right? And the results in terms of their online presence as a company, their results in terms of sales and revenue, their results in terms of customer experience and performance went up right across the board, right? And I'm trying to think that it's going to come to me probably within the last 30 seconds of our discussion today, but it will come to me. But there's lots of other companies that have done that, right? And then you've got companies that learn to do it right from the get-go, like Tesla, right? So Tesla does everything in that sense. Everything is digital. Tesla hasn't spent dime one on marketing externally with outside paid advertising from its inception. And yet it's got the #1 presence in the industry. It's not even close, right? Because they do everything digitally. They do everything online. They communicate from the sense of the customer, where they're at and how they're at. And they do that internally with their teams. And when something happens on the floor at Tesla, it can reach the highest levels of the executive management team that day and be implemented the next, right? So even though it's an enormous company with a lot of levels, that's how they institute the digital culture within the organization. And that's the difference. Mm-hmm. Data is no good if it's not used. And it's not going to be used if it's not understood. And if we don't prep that data for the audience that we're bringing it to, and I don't care what it's about, a new product, a new service, or internal data management, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's what you see with some of these companies. And I'm still regurgitating trying to get that name in the back of my You might remember it, Brandon. They were the ones that they did their work with Dynamic Signal.
They did what?
They did their project with Dynamic Signal.
Oh.
That's one of the other groups, and it's going to come to me.
I don't remember. I don't recall.
And how to change the culture of the companies? How is the first step?
That's for a different show, right?
Yeah.
That's such an enormous question, Elizabeth. You know, culture, you can't change the culture overnight. I mean, culture is something that happens because of what you do as a team and as people and as human beings. That's how you change culture. You change culture by getting everybody involved. And I'm sorry if I'm using my hands too much here.
No, don't.
But culture happens internally.
Yeah.
You can't externalize culture. You can't bring in culture.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Well,
Brad.
no, you're fine. I mean, I think that that's why I brought up that culture was such an important element about using data to make decisions, because if the culture of an organization has people crossing departments, sharing departments, working together, then I think there is more opportunity for internal people to ask the question about, do you capture this data? Could we look at it? You start getting your cross-functional teams working together better, and then you have that opportunity to actually use data all the way through a customer journey, or all the way through the prospect journey, or all the way through the product from the beginning of the line to the end. So to type of envisioning where that is. But if culture is very siloed, culture is departments that aren't sharing with other departments, I think it makes it very, very difficult for companies to even start with using data.
I would agree. I think that one of the things that you have to do with any organization is you need to start, sadly, with those existing silos and those existing teams, because usually that's what happens in most companies. And you need to help them sort of prioritize what their objectives are by grouping. And then when you can pull that out of them and you can bring it all together across all the groups and then create a digital roadmap for those teams, then you can now start to change the narrative and, more importantly, the language that everybody can relate to and use across the company, so that we can all understand each other. The problem is that the language that product research and industry research is using is not usually the language that accounting is using, or that marketing is using, or that even some of the leadership are using. So just right from the get-go, you've got different language being used, and that's creating cultural barriers across the company, right? That's where your silos live. So you got to break all that down, and you've got to get everybody to understand that what is your priority is actually the same as my priority. We're just calling it something different. And we need to get on the same page through a roadmap for the company. And the company's roadmap not only deals with the culture, but it also deals with those digital parts of their business that can now continue to change that as an overall organization, and not just one silo over another. The mistake that many companies make is they think, well, maybe our research department needs to be revamped and we'll start there. Well, the problem is, when you just do one silo in that way, it doesn't necessarily align with the others. So you've really got to create a high level mapping that will help you align all those goals from those departments and get the language unified. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I love listening to you, Thomas, talk about data. You have such a better grasp of it than, I mean, my world tends to be more on the sales and marketing side. And I love how you're able to see it across the board. But I know, just even in my own limited world of sales and marketing, that the biggest challenge I always see is, do the two departments share, and therefore you can make bigger decisions? I think you can all make decisions with your data from, I can look at my own open rates of emails. I could look in A/B test different messages to see which ones are, moving somebody down an opportunity. And then you could do that within the team. And then, you could do that across the marketing messages. You could keep going wider and wider. But the question is, are the teams willing to do that? And then are they actually equipped to do that well? And I think looking at data it's almost a discipline.
Mm-hmm.
It's a discipline to go slow down and look at the data. And in our current business culture of being 30-day revenues, 30-day goals, quarterly goals, it's one of those things. I just think it's probably one of the most important things that gets kicked in the background because we don't have time. But if we actually paused long enough to look at the data, we could create a lot of time by making better decisions.
Yeah, this point is very important. Try to make people evaluate and look at the data and don't feel that they are losing time with it. Because
Right.
unfortunately, most of the time when you say, let's look at this, let's evaluate that, they think they are losing time because they are not applying. And I think the big challenge is find a way to be friendly to show the data. You know, the data, normally when you talk about big data, and the few times that I saw evaluation of big data, they are not always friendly. And I think, Brandon, then you come in this as a marketing, you know, how to take what Thomas are saying and translate it in an easy way that everyone can look at and feel that they are first not losing time and second be easy to understand, like fast.
Yeah.
And isn't that the same everywhere? We all want to understand it quickly in small bites, right? And have it make sense to us. And
Yeah.
and if you can do that, that's the trick. I'm sorry, Brandon, you were gonna.
No. It reminded me. I saw a meme the other day that said, when you're in college, it's write a 10-page paper for me explaining this. And then when you get in the business world, it's explain that to me in 7 seconds or less, or else you're not going to get my attention. And I think data becomes that way too. I mean, it really does make sense.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, what are some of the most valuable ways that you are using or thinking about data in Jefo?
I think the sales results is something that we really know how to do. I think this is normal. This is the way the company already built stuffs. So this part, I think it's very well done. But I mean that for me, that I'm R&D, it's very hard. It's very hard to use this data because what is sale today is not what could be in a few years from now. So I need to look in what maybe is not what happens right now, but it's a kind of a trend that is happens. So I always need to look for a trend and then see if, and it's not easy to find it. It's not easy to find the trend and what's going on. But for sales, I think people are more easy. I think there is more, even more programs. There is more digital tools for that. But for another things like marketing, that also is the same like R&D, we need to look forward. I think we don't have the same tools to evaluate that. I don't know about what you think, but for me, this is not clear.
Yeah, I think in using the example that Thomas talked about with the shipping company, whose name he still can't remember, I think there's the ability with companies, and they do tend to be more enterprise companies that have the resources to do that and put team members on data management and data flows. There's a lot of opportunity to put systems in place to let the data give you, minute by minute, hour by hour, and daily feedback to help the business. And I think that's awesome, but that is reserved for a lot of larger enterprise type organizations. In SMBs, I still think what I see is it's more compartmentalized, and it's benefiting very specific things. So marketing is going to look at data around website traffic. They're going to look at click rates. They're going to look at ads, traffic, where traffic's coming from. They're going to look at things about um, visits, how long somebody stays before they leave, how many pages on average do they go to. And it's going to stay in the marketing department, and they're going to keep trying to make better and better decisions with it. And then you've got sales on the next side. But I think with SMBs, it just gets harder to create a system that's really going to make valuable impact. And so it just doesn't get picked up and created. What do you think about that, Thomas?
I agree. And I think that's where some of the big issues are. I would add to that, in sort of jumping off what Elizabeth was saying too, that very often, because each of these different departments are on different systems, right, and therefore using a different process, they don't align, and that data doesn't flow, right? So I think that's a big part of it too. I mean, marketing generally, and every company is different, will have so many different systems and different types of MarTech they're using. Research is doing the very same kinds of things, but on different systems. And very often what you have happening is that by the time somebody sits down and looks at all the different systems and processes that are being used, they're all over the map, right? And now it's just so difficult to align because they're all doing it in such different ways. And that's one of the key things that we find with many companies is, and this helps not only in the data, but it also helps in culture. You've got to align those systems, and you're going to find when you do the analysis on some of these systems, you don't need most of them, right? They're not necessarily achieving the goal you hope they would. And therefore you've got to align and really consolidate and get people on the same systems as much as you possible. I mean, you can't do that across the board, but where you can. So I think that's a big part of it too, especially for me when it comes to marketing. Marketing has its own, as you so rightly point out, Brandon, it's got its own data points that it's looking at, and it's doing that with different programs and systems that it's using that don't make sense necessarily to sales in many cases, and vice versa. And therefore, you're not getting the full picture as a leader in terms of what they're both telling you, right? And they may be telling you the same thing, but in different ways. And I think that's enormous, right? And that is that a challenge that you think you see a little bit with Jefo, Elizabeth, or is it different than that?
You're on mute.
We lost your voice.
There you are.
I'm mute. Yes, I think this is a kind of challenges that we have is a issue, not just in Jefo, but when I visit customers as well. When we discuss them about this big data, it's always the same. They have different systems. They don't talk to each other. They don't know how to merge the data. And yes, so, and I do think that we don't have really, once again, a clear vision how to solve it, because there is not a very clear, let's say, I don't like this word, but I'm going to use it, the vulgarization of the big data analysis, like really to put it in easy way for everyone to have access. Like you said, when you have a very big company, you talk about Tesla, you can, and also because they start, not because they are big, but because they start already in digital mode, it's like innovation company, or then you have a very big company that are able to do it. But for average companies today, we still don't have it very clear how to put all these connections together, and big data is still something that people are afraid of, really, to analyze and to.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I think you're exactly right with that. And that's why what I was trying to say earlier is that with the enterprise companies that have large budgets and they can assign teams. But I think for a lot of companies in that SMB and smaller levels, it's so much now, and it takes a lot of effort to really use it extremely well. And I think it's one of those, just if we kind of pretend like I think, and I've heard this in buying teams, it's like they've got to check the box to make sure that whatever they're buying is giving them data, but it doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, I think a lot of times they have no real plan on how they're going to use the data, but they got to have it. We got to have the data. But they go, great. What do you intend to do with it? We're not really sure yet, which I think is just code for we don't know. But in this day and age, if we don't check the box, we're not doing our job.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that in the end, it's like anything else. Don't buy and purchase and use and leverage that which you didn't have a plan for in the first place, right?
That never happens.
That never happens. Yeah. So I mean, if you don't have a good reason for doing it, other than the fact that it looks shiny and interesting, don't use it. So you've got to have a plan to begin with, and this is what we find. By the way, I did remember that shipping company is DB Schenker. So I was kind of there, but I didn't get it.
There you go.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree completely in that. You know why? Because like me, I don't feel that I'm a person that know how much to analyze data. This is why I'm here, talk to you, and I talked to Thomas many times, trying to get a way that we can start to work together in the data that I have. But still, to take the data, I think in the future somebody can use it. I don't know. I may don't know what to do it with now, but I know that somebody can do it pretty easy in the future. So
somebody be able to, you want them to be able to use the data easier, or you just think they will be able to?
No, I think that I'm doing it. Like, I don't know how to do it right now, but I want to have the data. I don't want to miss it.
Oh, I know what you're saying. So you want to
I'm thinking like today I don't have a right maybe a system or program or even person that can give me the right answer today. But if I have the data, I can, once I find it, I have already. I will not miss this opportunity to have the data. So
there's value in the data itself, irrespective, because somebody in the future will figure out how to use it.
Yes.
Well, there's truth in that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's absolutely truth in that. But hopefully sooner than later, right?
Yeah. I hope today or maybe yesterday. Yeah. But up to I'm still keep the data and try to do it as best. Maybe what we're looking for, I mean, Jefo looking for, my customers looking for, that we are like the same in terms of big data, is to find someone or some company that make it easier, like it really come and help us to analyze it. But once again, I think this should be clear. Maybe you need some education about what big data is, because people talk a lot, but the concept what big data is and what is the step by step to analyze it is not clear at all.
Right.
For everyone, I mean. It could be clear for you, Thomas,
not me.
For everyone.
Yeah. No, I think, you know what, Elizabeth, I think that's a great comment, because I think a lot of companies are in the same boat. And I know, I mean, I'll even say in running our company, there's areas that we use data pretty well. And I think there's a lot of areas where we don't. And it is overwhelming. And there is a bit of a, should we take that on now, or should we do it later? When is later? I don't know. but I do agree with you also that we're still collecting data in certain parts of the company and storing it, even though we're not using it now. But that is in the back of my thought is, well, if it takes us 2 years to get to it, we have 2 years of historical data to at least take a look at. And I would imagine a lot of companies are in that similar boat as you described.
Actually, in all the animal productions for food, I think we have most of the companies in the same conditions. A lot of that, a lot, and this is make me extremely concerned about, because I not believe. I'm really sure that if you find a way to put all this data together, we can be much more sustainable, because we are able to see where's the lost thing, where is more important to put our effort and everything. And this is what I'm very curious about, to find a way, not just for Jefo, but for all our customers. Like some of our concern at Jefo is not just us internally as a company, but how can we help our customers to see the data and try to be more sustainable, because animal production should find this way.
That's so interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's really where it lives, isn't it? I mean, if the customers can't make use of all the great data and research we're doing, then there isn't as much value to that whole process. So, and you couldn't have said that any better. Finding out what the customers want and why they want it, right, is the single most important of any company every day of the week, right? So that isn't something you can figure out today and then use that again next year, because it changes next year, right? And what's happening with the industry, both because of technology as well as the world we're living in, changes, and we need to adjust and be on top of that. You can't sit still anymore. It's constant learning. So that the reservoir of the data, like you both are talking about, is so critical. But there has to be a reason and a priority put against what you're doing, and that all comes back to the customer. What does the customer want, and why do they want it? And you should be able to answer that every single day. And sometimes it's the same, and sometimes it isn't. And it's our job with our clients to help them see that and never lose sight of it, because the moment you lose sight of it is the moment you lose that customer, right? And your position in the industry. So it's really important to be able to utilize and access that data in a way that makes sense, if I'm adding more value to that.
I have a question about legislation for you guys. Are our legislation ready to share data between companies, or to keep a platform free, that some data could just be there, and all the confidentiality where this data come from be really protected?
You want to tackle that, Brandon?
No, not really. It's like I think that in some ways, as you said, big data scares me, and in some ways, I think big data is it's already the norm. We just don't realize how much.
Has been
So
for a while. Yeah.
yeah, and it has been for a lot longer than we realize too, right? I think that there is so much more going on in the back end than we realize. And so when I spoke with a business owner of a company that came out of the print industry, and they're still in print, but back in my print days, we had databases that would give us 200 or 300 data points as we're working on like a direct mail list. And then we got into a social media, we started getting into much more deeper psychographics data. And so then that number got bigger. And this company, as they're taking all the data that they have access to, they had something like 8,000 data points per household on average over like 75% of the United States. I don't know what that number is, but big data knows everything about us, whether we like it or not. And so, Elizabeth, your question on legislation, I mean, I think the big companies, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Oracles and others, like that's one of their biggest competitive advantages. Why, they're going to fight that every step of the way to make any of that more of a accessible to everybody.
But
But this,
industry by
but
industry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just saying it's necessary to have legislation or not. We
Oh,
can just forget about that. And
oh yeah, especially in your industry, right? And in manufacturing, across industries, it's all different, and so you do have to be on top of that, especially when you're going over borders, nationalities, and you've got to be aware of all that and work it into your planning with respect to how that data is being used, and that's critical. I mean, for us, the changes in privacy acts globally. There's all sorts of different programs in place by different countries, and we have to be aware of that. And Brandon and I deal with that on literally a daily basis, where clients and customers are asking us, how are we going to deal with their countries or their regions or their industries,
Right.
rules and regulations as it relates to how we're going to support and build on what they're doing. So I think it's that's probably one of the most critical questions, Elizabeth. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. I've been really curious what other people watching are thinking about this for their business, because I know members of Digitize HQ are in companies from huge, you know big range of sizes, and I am really curious what other people think about this. And it is difficult because data is such a broad term, but it is such an important topic that honestly I get overwhelmed by it when I think about it. It's yeah, it's a big topic. It's a big project to take on, at least for me.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of the biggest things that we deal with clients is to help them organize that in a way that they can actually use
Right.
for their goals and their and the opportunities that they have. And we deal with a number of different industries. One of the bigger industries we deal with, Elizabeth, is the leather industry, right? And that ties into a lot of the areas that you're involved with in terms of ag, and we've become quite versed in how they can do things globally when it comes to many of the regulations that impact what they're doing. And we have to build that in language that we can understand and that their customers can understand, so that when they are marketing globally, right, and they are working with all of these partners and all these stakeholders and all these customers globally, that we're doing so in a way that's impactful and has value to all of them without crossing over lines that get somebody in trouble by doing so. So you've got that's part of the planning. That's part of what you need to do as an organization. But it doesn't need to be overwhelming. It just needs to be done, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, hey, Elizabeth, before we finish up, do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about you and Jefo? I think we're running a couple minutes late, and we didn't do a really great introduction of Elizabeth. I'm so sorry for that. We were behind, and I went right into work mode. But Elizabeth, you've been a great panelist with us today, talking about data. But why don't you share with everybody a little bit about you? And you're in Brazil. We didn't talk about that. And tell us a little bit about you and Jefo.
yes, I'm in Brazil right now, but I work for a Canadian company. It's Jefo Nutrition Inc. Our company is producing additives for animal nutrition. Our main focus is like to improve animal health and productions in a very good way, with lower antibiotics use and more cost effective. And my position is R&D, so I'm head of all the R&D, and we're looking for new products, but especially new ways to work with animal productions industry and these days, all animal productions industry is having an issue, a lot of demand from the customers, like everyone wants to know what we are eating. So we need to really be responsible in this area. And yes, we are very concerned about big data and how to use it, because I think it's an industry that more have that we have a lot of data, but we don't know how to use it. And so this is basically what we are doing. Jefo, it's a company that looking for a better animal productions and sustainable agriculture, and this is match with my personal purpose. This is why I'm in Jefo too.
Very cool. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank you.
Thomas,
Thank
you want to close us out? And
Yeah, sure. Although I obviously did a horrible job introducing you, so I do apologize for that, Elizabeth. But yeah, this has been fantastic and really interesting. We really appreciate you taking the time, and it ties in so nicely with what we are all about, and that's how digital impacts any and all companies, and where and how they can use it in a way to be productive, and make revenue and take a long-term approach to the building of their business.
that
That's
sounds
it.
great.
Yeah. So
Yep.
thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, guys. It was
Yeah, thank you
great.
for joining us today. All right, everybody. We'll see you next Friday at I think we'll go back to our 11 a.m. Eastern time slot. And Thomas, do we know who's on next week with us yet?
We haven't confirmed, but we will be announcing that in the next
Okay.
day or two.
Very cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.